Chapter 2 of Mary Barton. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Leanne Howlett. Mary Barton by Elizabeth Cleghorn Gaskell. Chapter 2. A Manchester Tea Party. Polly, put the kettle on, and let's have tea. Polly, put the kettle on, and we'll all have tea. Here we are, wife. Didst thou think thou'd lost us? Quoth hearty-voiced Wilson, as the two women rose and shook themselves in preparation for their homeward walk. Mrs. Barton was evidently soothed, if not cheered, by the unburdening of her fears and thoughts to her friend, and her approving look went far to second her husband's invitation that the whole party should adjourn from Green Hayes Fields to tea at the Bartons' house. The only faint opposition was raised by Mrs. Wilson, on account of the lateness of the hour at which they would probably return, which she feared on her baby's account. "Now hold your tongue, missus, will you?" said her husband good-temperedly. "Don't you know them brats never goes to sleep till long past 10? And haven't you a shawl under which you can tuck one lad's head as safe as a bird's under its wing? And as for t'other one, I'll put it in my pocket rather than not stay, now we are this far away from Ancoats." "Or I can lend you another shawl," suggested Mrs. Barton. "Ay, anything rather than not stay." The matter being decided, the party proceeded home, through many half-finished streets, all so like one another, that you might have easily been bewildered and lost your way. Not a step, however, did our friends lose, down this entry, cutting off that corner, until they turned out of one of these innumerable streets into a little paved court, having the backs of houses at the end opposite to the opening, and a gutter running through the middle to carry off household slops, washing suds, etc. The women who lived in the court were busy taking in strings of caps, frocks, and various articles of linen, which hung from side to side, dangling so low that if our friends had been a few minutes sooner, they would have had to stoop very much, or else the half-wet clothes would have flapped in their faces. But although the evening seemed yet early when they were in the open fields, among the pent-up houses, night, with its mists and its darkness, had already begun to fall. Many greetings were given and exchanged between the Wilsons and these women, for not long ago they had also dwelt in this court. Two rude lads, standing at a disorderly-looking house-door, exclaimed, as Mary Barton, the daughter, passed, "Eh, look! Polly Barton's getten a sweetheart." For he had getten him yet no benefice. Prologue to Canterbury Tales. Of course this referred to young Wilson, who stole a look to see how Mary took the idea. He saw her assume the air of a young fury, and to his next speech she answered not a word. Mrs. Barton produced the key of the door from her pocket, and on entering the house-place it seemed as if they were in total darkness, except one bright spot, which might be a cat's eye, or might be, what it was, a red-hot fire, smouldering under a large piece of coal, which John Barton immediately applied himself to break up, and the effect instantly produced was warm and glowing light in every corner of the room. To add to this, although the coarse yellow glare seemed lost in the ruddy glow from the fire, Mrs. Barton lighted a dip by sticking it in the fire, and having placed it satisfactorily in a tin candlestick, began to look further about her, on hospitable thoughts intent. The room was tolerably large, and possessed many conveniences. On the right of the door, as you entered, was a longish window, with a broad ledge. On each side of this hung blue and white check curtains, which were now drawn, to shut in the friends met to enjoy themselves. Two geraniums, unpruned and leafy, which stood on the sill, formed a further defence from outdoor pryers. In the corner between the window and the fireside was a cupboard, apparently full of plates and dishes, cups and saucers, and some more nondescript articles, for which one would have fancied their possessors could find no use, such as triangular pieces of glass to save carving knives and forks from dirtying tablecloths. However, it was evident Mrs. Barton was proud of her crockery and glass, for she left her cupboard door open, with a glance round of satisfaction and pleasure. On the opposite side to the door and window was a staircase, and two doors, one of which, the nearest to the fire, led into a sort of little back kitchen, where dirty work, such as washing up dishes, might be done, and whose shelves served as larder and pantry and storeroom and all. The other door, which was considerably lower, opened into the coal hole, the slanting closet under the stairs, from which, to the fireplace, there was a gay-coloured piece of oilcloth laid. The place seemed almost crammed with furniture, sure sign of good times among the mills. Beneath the window was a dresser with 3 deep drawers. Opposite the fireplace was a table, which I should call a Pembroke, only that it was made of deal, and I cannot tell how far such a name may be applied to such humble material. On it, resting against the wall, was a bright green japanned tea-tray, having a couple of scarlet lovers embracing in the middle. The firelight danced merrily on this, and really, setting all taste but that of a child's aside, it gave a richness of colouring to that side of the room. It was in some measure propped up by a crimson tea-caddy, also of japanneware. A round table on one branching leg, ready for use, stood in the corresponding corner to the cupboard, and if you can picture all this, with a washy but clean stencil pattern on the walls, you can form some idea of John Barton's home. The tray was soon hoisted down, and before the merry clatter of cups and saucers began, the women disburdened themselves of their out-of-door things, and sent Mary upstairs with them. Then came a long whispering and chinking of money, to which Mr. and Mrs. Wilson were too polite to attend, knowing, as they did full well, that it was all related to the preparations for hospitality that, in their turn, they should have such pleasure in offering. So they tried to be busily occupied with the children, and not to hear Mrs. Barton's directions to Mary. "Run, Mary dear, just round the corner, and get some fresh eggs at Tipping's. You may get 1 apiece, that will be 5d, and see if he has any nice ham cut, that he would let us have 1 pound of." "Say 2 pounds, missus, and don't be stingy," chimed in the husband. "Well, 1.5 pounds, Mary. And get it Cumberland ham, for Wilson comes from there away, and it will have a sort of relish of home with it he'll like. And Mary," seeing the lassie feigned to be off, "you must get a pennyworth of milk and a loaf of bread. Mind you get it fresh and new, and that's all, Mary." "No, it's not all," said her husband. "Thou must get 6 pennyworth of rum to warm the tea. Thou'll get it at the Grapes. And thou just go to Alice Wilson. He says she lives just right round the corner, under 14 Barber Street." This was addressed to his wife. "And tell her to come and take her tea with us. She'll like to see her brother, I'll be bound, let alone Jane and the twins." "If she comes, she must bring a teacup and saucer, for we have but half a dozen, and here's 6 of us," said Mrs. Barton. "Pooh, pooh, Jim and Mary can drink out of one, surely." But Mary secretly determined to take care that Alice brought her teacup and saucer, if the alternative was to be her sharing anything with Jim. Alice Wilson had but just come in. She had been out all day in the fields, gathering wild herbs for drinks and medicine, for in addition to her invaluable qualities as a sick nurse and her worldly occupations as a washerwoman, she added a considerable knowledge of hedge and field simples, and on fine days, when no more profitable occupation offered itself, she used to ramble off into the lanes and meadows as far as her legs could carry her. This evening she had returned loaded with nettles, and her first object was to light a candle and see to hang them up in bunches in every available place in her cellar room. It was the perfection of cleanliness. In one corner stood the modest-looking bed, with a check curtain at the head, the whitewashed wall filling up the place where the corresponding one should have been. The floor was bricked and scrupulously clean, although so damp that it seemed as if the last washing would never dry up. As the cellar window looked into an area in the street, down which boys might throw stones, it was protected by an outside shutter, and was oddly festooned with all manner of hedgerow, ditch, and field plants, which we are accustomed to call valueless, but which have a powerful effect either for good or for evil, and are consequently much used among the poor. The room was strewed, hung, and darkened with these bunches, which emitted no very fragrant odour in their process of drying. In one corner was a sort of broad hanging shelf, made of old planks, where some old hoards of Alice's were kept. Her little bit of crockery-ware was ranged on the mantelpiece, where also stood her candlestick and box of matches. A small cupboard contained at the bottom coals, and at the top her bread and basin of oatmeal, her frying-pan, teapot, and a small tin saucepan, which served as a kettle, as well as for cooking the delicate little messes of broth which Alice was sometimes able to manufacture